All right, I got Sandy Martin here on the show. She's the founder of Biohacker Expo and a health enthusiast and a ton of knowledge. Sandy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Joel. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, super excited to get into your story. You know, I was reading that you had spent over $97,000 a in your first year. It's just in 1 year trying to recover
Yeah.
from a brain injury caused by mold. But I'm guessing too, when you first got into it, you had no idea it was caused by mold. There's probably you didn't if you knew, you probably would have spent 10,000 and you just would have been done with it. But I really want to dive into this with you. Well, actually, before that, let's take even a step back. Was that how you really got into this biohacking space and into the health and wellness space? Was that like your impetus into it, or was there something else that got you into it?
No, that's exactly what got me into it. I was running Comic Cons before I got mold in my brain. And it was during COVID, and we converted a live events business into a virtual business. And I was leading that effort and that technology and that transformation, top of my game, best work of my life, like so excited. It was stressful because we had to refund about 400,000 in tickets, but we
Wow.
created a very, very huge business and had the largest celebrity meet and greet business in the world in September of 2020. And then I was so stressed, I was like, oh, I'll just take a break. I'll paint some walls. And I just didn't know. I didn't know that there was mold behind the walls. And so I spent this extended period of time painting with this threat behind my walls that I didn't know. And I found out even just 2 months ago that the VOCs off of the paint fumes, those act as a carrier. So sometimes if mold is hidden, it doesn't have a way to get into our bodies. But if there's an extra chemical in the air, it can ride on that chemical into our bodies. And so for me, I lost my cognition straight away. It was 2 weeks after I did that. It took me months to figure that out. But 2 weeks after I did that, I painted those walls. I I was foggy. I didn't really know what was going on. I was like, oh, it's burnout. I'm working so hard. I felt a little depressed, a little confused. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what people talk about. This is burnout. Okay, I'm going to take a couple days off. And I did, and I continued to get worse. And so I had to really get curious to figure out what was going on. I loved my life, so I didn't believe I was actually depressed. And I started to watch a lot of YouTube videos about the brain to understand what might happen if someone was feeling this way, but they they didn't have a reason to. Like I wasn't mad about anything, upset about anything. I didn't have a plaguing worry, but I felt depressed.
Mm.
And so that led me to understand what inflammation does to the body and what metabolic health means. And I relearned the word mitochondria for the first time in 30 years in a totally different context. And so I started to explore things that would make me feel better because I just thought it was stress. But as I kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and I saw a neurologist and had a brain scan and got misdiagnosed, and we can go into all of these twists and turns if you'd like, but at the end of the day, I wasn't getting better. I went from paleo to keto to intermittent fasting keto, and I tried exercising, but my heart rate was going up after exercise instead of down.
Mm.
So I knew something was really wrong, and I just didn't know. I even got a misdiagnosis of having arsenic poisoning at one point. I mean, I would try literally anything to figure out what was wrong. And if it wasn't for Dave Asprey and his books, I would have never known it was mold. And so it was
Wow.
his story that helped me understand. And his example through biohacking is really what triggered the desire in me to take all of my event knowledge and bring a biohacking event to Miami, which is where I lived at the time.
Okay. Yeah. It sounded like it helped you ask one more question. Like maybe it's mold. Like I haven't thought about that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of
Yeah.
what set you off for that. Okay. I do want to dive into a little bit of this because I'm really curious, even though you and I know we're definitely going to talk about some of the hormonal, we're seeing an epidemic right now with men. I mean, I know guys right now that are 19, 20 years old, they need to be on testosterone replacement. It's ridiculous. And women right now needing IVF therapy more than ever. So we're in a huge hormone epidemic. And I know we're going to talk about that shortly, but I do want to dive into this mold because I see a lot of health intake forms that I go through, and I think it's a lot more pervasive and then people think and give it, and there's still like zero knowledge to it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you also, looking back, you spent 97 grand, like good for you because most people won't do that. But now looking back, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? How would you have triaged it differently and gone like, oh, if I had known this, I just would have done this first because that would have given me answers and clues sooner.
Well, if I had known it was mold, I would have just moved, right? Like I had to
Yeah.
get out of the environment I was in, and that was the number one thing that I had to do to get better. My body had to detox, and it's important to have these conversations out in the open too, because the mold doctor that I found, the second one I found, took me for $13,000 day one. And there are these predatory doctors. They're cash pay, functional medicine, mold expert doctors pushing tests that have nothing to do with the condition. I had already been tested for mold. We already knew it was in my body from a prior doctor. He insisted on another $3,000 test. And then he just insisted that he had to have one more. And I don't know what money they make off the back end of these things, but to have my genetic test done, it didn't have to be a $6,000 genetic test. There are genetic tests to test for APOE4 that are much cheaper than that. And he never even told me if I had the gene or not. I still don't know. I don't know how to read the tests that he ran.
Wow.
And that was the spring of 2021. And so part of the expense is the desperation to feel better. Now, I bought a hyperbaric oxygen chamber because I got misdiagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. That's why I call it a brain injury, because my brain scan showed injury. It
Yeah.
looked like I had a brain injury, but he didn't fully know how to read the scans like Dr. Amen. I had to take Dr. Amen's brain certification course in order to know how to read my own scans. That's actually how I figured it out, because had I not taken that course and heard Dave Asprey talk about his scans from Dr. Amen, I wouldn't have put it together. But I had a similar scan that he described in his book.
Mm.
And so once I knew, and it took me 2 months with that doctor, he told me two things. One, I had to move. Well, I had to throw away everything I owned, anything soft. And so it's taken me a long time to be willing to put anything soft in my home again.
Mm.
I bought outdoor furniture in my next home to put indoors so that it could be wiped down without any issue, because I threw away so much stuff.
Yeah.
Even just like the under part of a table, they consider soft. They consider it something you can't clean.
Wow.
And so I got rid of everything in my life, and it was so traumatic. So I had to move and do that. And then he said, the number one, the next best thing you can do is to not focus on your symptoms. And I thought, okay, I'm waking up every day, noticing how achy I am, and mold is a chronic inflammatory response. It creates a chronic inflammatory response, and it's called CIRS, C-I-R-S, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And so with that, everything hurts. And there I was at 45, achy and tired and confused. And how many women out there at 45, thereabouts, get misdiagnosed with perimenopause because they're achy and exhausted and have some brain fog? It's so easy to take these symptoms and just write it off as something else. Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue,
Menopause. I hear
perimenopause.
that all the time. Yeah.
And so it's possible that toxins in our environment are creating inflammation in our bodies that are creating these symptoms. And if we can bring down the inflammation, then having a hormonal change midlife doesn't have to be disruptive. So the one really good thing that came out of this for me was that, well, it's a double-edged sword. One, the mold put me into early menopause. And so I'm 2 years post-menopause at 49. And But the good part of all that is that because I was so intent on getting rid of inflammation, that I had no symptoms through peri or menopause or in post. Because
Nice.
it's not the hormonal change that causes the symptoms. The change of life is not a disease. The inflammation that we've been protected, our fertility hormones have protected us from feeling the wear and tear we put on our bodies. And so when the hormones shift and we're still living an unhealthy lifestyle, boy, do we feel it.
Mm.
And so I see that over and over and over again. And you hear it in the advice of doctors. Well, stop drinking wine. Don't eat spicy food. Get enough sleep. They're telling you, the advice they're giving you is how to live with lower inflammation. And so even conventional medicine knows that that's true, but they don't put the reason behind it. They don't want to talk about inflammation. They don't want to. It's easier to just give hormones. But I think sometimes hormone therapy is just symptom management.
Right.
And so what causes that imbalance? For me, it was toxic mold. For someone, it might be a food sensitivity. It could be just from drinking. It could be from the fragrances in our soaps in our home. And so I think it's really important, to look at hormones more holistically. And instead of it being a problem, let's see, what the problem behind the problem is. Do you have mold behind your walls? Do you have paint fumes that you're exposed to? What's your work environment like? What's in your environment?
Yeah. Sandy, I'm curious too, what was the approach that got you better? When did you start seriously noticing changes? Was it a 6-month detox? Like, what did it, I'm just, for listeners that are listening to your story that might be thinking, man, I think I might have that. I don't want to get scammed $97,000 or $13,000 from some doctor. What would be your advice for them if they're kind of going through this process? And is there anybody that you found was like really, really good with their expertise?
Oh, goodness. I have not found a single person who actually can give solid, affordable advice on how to get through this. I really, truly had to figure it out myself. So, like, the hyperbaric oxygen chamber was helpful for my brain injury once I detoxed the mold. Before, it gave
Right.
me a headache.
Yep.
And
That's why I always
so,
tell people, like, these hacks are amazing, but you can never hack your way out of an illness. Like, they're great,
right,
but you've got to have at least a foundation. If you don't have a foundation, you're just going to optimize what? Nothing.
that's exactly right. That's the whole problem with the industry. But it's cheaper to oftentimes to try something that is a biohack than it is to get to the root of something.
Mm.
So can if you can affect your sleep by wearing, I'm not wearing them, yellow glasses, then that's a much cheaper way. 80, there you go.
Yeah.
$80 glasses are a much better way to get better sleep than drugs. And that works. So if I'm really off kilter, I'll start with red for about 15 minutes in the morning. I'll go to amber, I'll go to light yellow midday, and then reverse it. Amber, then red, and then sleep. I sleep through the night.
Yeah.
And it's awkward sometimes. I mean, they're really cute on you, but I just like, I just don't wear them all the time because they're not that
Right.
cute on me.
They're not cute. Yeah. Agreed. Agreed.
And so there are things we can try. We can put our bare feet on the ground every day for 20 minutes. That helps with inflammation. But it takes time and it takes a commitment to trying things. And if someone were to try a few things and still they don't feel better, well, maybe it's time we get a gut test. Maybe it's time we get our blood drawn. Maybe we figure out, and when I say blood draw, I don't mean your lipid panel from your GP, because that's a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
It's not going to tell you anything. You got to know about your food sensitivities, your hormone levels, your red blood cell counts. There's so many things. 5 inflammation markers. My favorite test is from Ginfinity, and it'll test for clotho and senescent cells and 5 inflammation markers.
Oh,
and,
cool.
and
I'm not
that's
familiar with them.
gold right there.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
JIN, Ginfinity.
Awesome. I'm writing that one down. Thank you. Was there? I want to. One last thing I want to ask you about the mold, and then we can kind of dive into this crisis. We're looking at the hormone and I think fertility epidemic. But go
Well,
ahead.
yeah, I realized I didn't finish
Oh,
answering
go
your
ahead,
question
please.
though.
Yeah.
So to not focus on the symptoms, oftentimes I think this is relevant to the conversation of mold. People who have mold as a cause for whatever ails them, coincidentally, almost always have a chemical sensitivity that gives them a headache. So they'll, if they smell perfume or a candle or an air freshener, they get this massive headache. And I had that. And so they teach people in this case how to stop the sensation because it's a, what do you call it? It's a misfiring of the amygdala. And so I had to learn with all of my pain symptoms a technique. It's the simplest, dumbest thing. And you just stomp your foot, throw out your hands, and say stop out loud. And it creates a pattern disruption inside the brain. And so that's one very simple, totally free technique that if you're experiencing aches and pains and your attention is going to the aches and pains, you're making it worse. But we think that if we're aware of what's going on in our bodies, then we can heal it. But the body does it automatically. It doesn't need our attention.
Mm.
And so when our attention is on what we value in our lives and not on the physicality of what's bothering us, then our brains and our hearts and brains sync up and kind of do the work when we're not paying attention. So the best, simplest way, stomp your foot, throw out your hands, and say the word stop out loud. And it's dumb, but it works.
I love that. I
So
was
that
going to
helps.
ask you if there was a surprising biohack that cost almost nothing that had a massive impact, and you beat me to it. So yeah, that's great. And I can see why too, because you're using like all five of your senses. You're saying it, you're visualizing it, you're moving. There's dynamic. Yeah, so that makes sense. It's a pattern interrupt. That's so valuable. Wow. And it's something I can actually give to some of my mold clients. So thank you. That's amazing. Um, was there a biohack? I'm just curious. Was there a biohack though in out of that 97,000? Was there anything that you did find prolific or at least impactful? If you for any what was the at least the one that you thought made a
The thing
dividend?
that helped the most was frequencies, both sound and electric, and light, sound, light, and electricity. And so I don't know if you can see on my shirt, it says Gong Vibes.
I
I
see
play
that.
gongs now because of what I've gone through. And I went to my first gong bath right after I found out I had a mold diagnosis. And they had hit a tuning fork and touched it to my big toe, and I couldn't feel it vibrating. And I was like, "You didn't strike it." And then they put it on my leg, and then I was like, "Oh, that is okay. I guess I do have peripheral neuropathy." That's another symptom. If somebody's like losing sensation in their toes, they might have capillary hypoperfusion is what they call it. It's one of those symptoms. And so I had that, and I went to the gong bath with the gongs behind my head, lying on the floor, laying down for an hour. That's about all I could muster. It was very difficult to get out of the house past 7, but I managed to do it. And then I could not feel the vibration on my toes the first time. But a week later, the second time I went, I could feel the vibrations on my toes. And so I knew that those powerful sound waves coming off those gongs in this range of like 40 to 70 hertz was doing something to move the mold through my body and allow me to
Wow.
detox it. And so then I got my own gong, and I would just sit and just tap it and just let the sensations flow over my body. But it wasn't just sound. There are light helmets. I used the V Light initially, and now I'm using the Thrive.
Yeah.
And it puts near infrared light into the brain. And so that helps to
What was the
activate
second one that
the
you mentioned?
Thrive, Cera, Thrive.
Awesome.
And that one, it just, it's got some really cool patterns, and it puts me like right out to sleep in one of the settings. It's wonderful. I use it almost every night. Um, that that's another frequency that helps because it's not just the light frequency, but also it pulses at different rates. And so that pulsing and also the frequency of light, they both help to drain the lymphatic system of the brain.
Mm. Wow.
And then the third thing, was microcurrent. And so that you can put these little straps on your wrist. I used the Healy and just put frequencies through my body. And that helped a lot too. So on my 2 months after my first visit with the doctor that took me for 13 grand, he was surprised I felt better. And he wanted to put me on additional treatments for things like Bartonella, which was dormant in my body. And I was not going to take unnecessary things just because they could be an issue. I was going to stay on a course. And the real reason why I never saw him again was because he asked me on my 2 follow-up visits about my symptoms. But he had told me the number one thing I could do to get better was to not focus on my symptoms. And the first time I thought he was joking. And the second time I was like, I can never speak to you again.
Yeah.
Like, I did such a good job of just living my life. I was like, I'm sure I had symptoms, but I don't have anything to tell you because I didn't put my attention there. And I was getting better. And so good for him for teaching me that. But at the same time, like, he makes money if I have symptoms. And so he still allowed himself to go into that model, that traditional doctor model of you're sick and I'm here to tell you what to do. And I wish there was a better way for people to get help. I wish, because my experience won't work for everybody. Right? People will pick up ideas from my story and from Ben's story. Ben Azadi has a story about how he treated mold, and others. And Dave Asprey's story is great. His documentary is great. But it's like we have to be our own investigators of our own bodies to figure this stuff out.
Yeah. So Keith, thank you for sharing that story. I was thinking too, that's so cool that you said sound and frequency. I'd be curious, have you ever messed with the amp coil device, or have you ever seen some of their tech?
No, but they're going to be at my event and I'm going to try it at the event. Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you used it?
I have one actually. Yeah,
Oh, how do
and
you like
I
it?
I like it. I don't have any major like illnesses, but back in the day when I got it, it was like 7 grand. And I'm like, you know what? I think this is a pretty good investment. Um, because it can do so much. It can treat so many things. And I thought, if my kids ever get sick or anything happens, like this is, we're going to the pandemic or whatever it was. I can't remember when I got it, around 2019. I'm like, this is a good thing that I can always use to like, that if, like you said, a doctor's like, we don't know what's wrong with you. I'm like, this device can pick it up through biofeedback. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
I will say I have tested the biofeedback. You use it. There's a voice print that you use to see, what you can use it to see what's going on in your body. And I have had like other tests done that have like backed up what the voice print said, which I thought was pretty
Wow.
remarkable. And I've had that happen multiple times for myself and for my kids and my family. So I will say it's been pretty cool. Yeah.
That is really cool. Yeah. When I spoke with Aaron about that, I was like, from my voice, you can diagnose me. He said, everything has a frequency.
Yeah.
The other really cool thing with frequencies that I've been trying is Code Health. Have you heard of them?
No.
They make these saline drops that are imprinted with a healing frequency. And so it boils down to the idea that water has memory. And so they put the frequency in the saline water, and then you put these drops under your tongue. And I am inclined to be really woo-woo, and that was a hard chasm for me to cross. But I was using the drops just because it's a precaution. I was in an environment. I was at a Comic-Con actually a few weeks ago with my event manager, and I know that people get sick at these things. And I used the antivirus drop and the breathe drop, and she didn't. And she got sick for 5 days coming out of that event, and I didn't get sick at all. And so it's either that everything I do makes me able to withstand these things, or there's really something to those drops and those frequencies. And I don't know. It's an invisible technology. It's hard to know. But I'm a big fan of frequencies. I even make my own sound chairs. And so
So cool.
I like to I like to go on them between like 27 hertz and 36 hertz, and it helps to drain my lymphatic system. And it, my theory, and I'm not very scientific about this, but I have read some papers that whole body vibration between 30 and 50 hertz can stimulate stem cell proliferation throughout the body. And so I figure can't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I think even when we look at the vibration platforms, right? I think I have an old one
Mm-hmm.
that Dave Asprey did. I think he just picked it at 40 hertz because that's kind of like a
Yeah.
standard one, and you see that. So, yeah, that makes sense. And afterwards, I'll have to introduce you to my friend Veronica. She does a lot of frequency and the tinctures and like all based on
Nice.
scans. It's really fascinating. Yeah, I'll have to introduce you. You guys will hit it off. So, really cool. Okay, let's chat about, okay, let's talk about hormone health and just some of the things you're seeing throughout, and like, coming up right now in the health world. I think you and I are both very aware that we were talking about in the beginning, there's an epidemic, let's face it, of hormone dysregulation, men needing TRT in their 19, 20-year-old college kids. And this is not because they had an injury. This is like, no, we're seeing this, and then as well as women in IVF. Like, what are some of the big things that you're seeing, and why is this something that you're really passionate about?
Well, I want to start by saying I don't have an expertise on hormones. Everything I know from someone else, and I've picked it up by watching podcasts or presentations at events or other sorts of interviews. But what I learned at Biohacker Expo at our first event in last year was the impact of endocrine disruptors on our hormones. And they were, Dr. Rudy Eberwein was telling the story of these teenage boys with testosterone levels as if they were in their 80s.
Wow.
And it's about the water and the fragrances and the plastics and the chemicals and the mold, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And I know that I have been slowly getting these things out of my environment. And I don't, when I told you about the Ginfinity test, after having chronic inflammatory response syndrome, I have 5 inflammation markers well within normal range just a few years later. And to me, that's just a huge accomplishment. And so I'm concerned. I get a lot of pushback because I have more men than women speaking at my event. And as a woman, I'm expected to uphold the standard of 50-50 on my stage. And I just don't really think about gender in that regard. So I get a lot of heat. So I'm going to get some more heat from from women for what I'm about to say, because the idea amongst some women is that our voices are not getting heard. But my concern, because I was with a man and a woman who were making arguments at a conference, and this man was like, men have never had it this rough. And she didn't say anything. And later she was like, I just had to keep my mouth shut. And I was like, but men really have never had it this bad. And women make 90% of the financial decisions in the home. And so that perfume that we wear, the shampoos that we use, the fluoride in the toothpaste, the plastics that we keep the food in, if we're reheating anything in plastic, if we have black plastic spoons or like spatulas, if we have I use ChatGPT to find hundreds and hundreds of things in the home. It goes on and on and on. The floor cleaner, the bleach, the dryer sheets, all of these things, they're designed to stick to us, and they get in our skin and they disrupt our hormones. We've never seen cancer levels like we see them now. We've never seen hormonal disruption like we see it now. And so I hear you say that these teenagers need testosterone replacement therapy, and I don't disagree that they need help. But I think first, if we can just talk about what it means to protect our homes, we need to protect our homes from the convenience marketplace, the plastics and the fragrances and all the things that make life easier. If we can protect our homes from toxins, then we can protect our bodies and protect our kids from growing up feeling unmotivated, feeling this struggle in getting started in life. Because if that's associated with low T for boys and girls, we've got an epidemic. We've got a problem of kids growing up and knowing how to lead their own lives. And so I think that, the way that you help people on your podcast, I think it's knowing what the threat really is imperative to fixing that problem.
Yeah. No, I agree. And by the way, just so we're clear, I don't think they should be on TRT. I'm just saying that their numbers are so low. And I was just talking to a friend the other day who's told me his nephew is 19-year-old collegiate swimmer, and he needs to be. They want to put him on testosterone replacement. And I'm like, that's ridiculous, because like you said, we saw this, and Dr. Shauna Swan writes about it in her book Countdown, the epidemic that we're seeing with men. And since the 1950s, their sperm count has dropped about 50%. I mean, it's ridiculous. And to your point, the phthalates and all these things. What are some of the big ones? Because I'm not aware, Sandy. If someone's starting to make some changes in their home, or they're purchasing, like you said, women make 90% of the decisions when it comes to the home, when it comes to the family's health. What are some of the big things? And I know you alluded to just like, yeah, if you're wrapping it in foils and all this, what are some other ones that maybe we're not aware of that we can just make some simple changes like right now?
So what are some things in our environment that we need to look out for so that we can protect ourselves from this? I call them the bio villains. In our homes.
Yeah.
And I have an article about that on my website if anybody's interested in the 19 bio villains that you have to worry
Sandy,
about.
Where's your website so people can go there right now?
It's biohackerexpo.com.
Okay.
And so if you just scroll down the homepage, you'll find the 19 bio villains. And look, if we don't filter the things before they get to us, then we're just asking our liver and kidneys to do it for us. And then that stress on the body, that unseen stress, we don't realize all the work our bodies are doing to keep us feeling good or even marginal. And so if we can get at it by filtering the water, filtering the air, avoiding parabens and phthalates and microplastics, and cooking with stainless steel or ceramic, switching to wooden spoons, or even silicone is better than plastic. I started to keep all the little glass jars from the grocery store, so I don't have any more plastic containers that I keep things in. Even our makeup, I would love to have pretty nails, but I don't, because I'm not going to put that on my body.
Well, I was thinking you're such a great test subject too, right? Because I'm assuming based on the mold exposure, you're sensitive to everything. So I'm guessing too, for you, when you made these simple swaps, did you start to notice some big changes too? Like, wow, I'm less reactive. Yeah.
Yes. I am no longer really affected by fragrances anymore, which is a double-edged sword. I can be around them and I don't want to be. But it's nice that I don't get headaches anymore. I used to get really bad headaches whenever we had a rule with my friends. They could wear perfume around me, but they couldn't hug me. And I can hug a friend who's wearing perfume now, but I really don't want to.
This reminds me of a Seinfeld episode where he can't give he can't give a hug. Okay, that's great. No, it's not you, it's me. I can't give you a hug. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's just little things. I read recently that the automotive cleaners are loaded with endocrine disruptors. So what you would put to wipe down your dashboard to make it smell nice and be free of dust is a major offender with hormones. And so think of all these guys that are keeping their cars clean and shiny and working with that wax and that stuff. That's like terrible for the body.
Yeah. Okay. So much good stuff. And I think it's just, everything is, again, similar to like the mold. I think it's more pervasive than we think. These things we're just so used to, right? And it's just, and I was talking to Dr. Wendy Trudeau about this a while back, and she mentioned, I go, what do you think is like, she wrote, I forget what her book's called. It's like a Toxic Dirty Girl or something like that. It's really cute. But she said, here's one for you, Joel, that is not expected, but used all the time. And it was the plastic in tea bags. I would have
Oh,
never thought about that. Right. And so, it's like, to your point, it's just, there's so much, and it's just, we're not aware. But I like that if someone can go to your blog, that the 19 things, because these are, and then there's some swaps that they can make, I'm assuming as well, right? You have
yes. Yeah.
these are the villains, and then here's some swaps. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Um,
But I was making coffee in a coffee pot filtered through plastic and these paper filters. I mean, my first step was, I'll get rid of the paper. And I had one of those wire-based baskets. And then I realized, I'm putting hot water over plastic to make my coffee every morning. And so then I
what
switched
were
to a
you
French
using,
press.
Sandy? Were you using an AeroPress?
No, I was just using a coffee made, like
Oh,
coffee maker.
okay.
It was delicious and convenient. And it took me a long time to figure out all of the ways. And those K pods, they're loaded with microplastics. And it's just like this steady process of peeling the onion, figuring out what else I can get rid of next. I didn't get rid of my silicone spatulas until a month ago. My mom came in. She's like, really? Are you serious? Fine. I don't like the way wood feels, but now I switched to wood. And so we keep each other accountable. If we've only used the glass containers, we've switched to wooden utensils. We just don't use plastic if we can help it. But some things are still packaged in it. All of my meats are packaged in plastic. My butter is wrapped in a plastic film around the paper.
Yeah.
The disposable cups are probably people's worst contributor to their health. If you are going out for coffee every day and using their cups, you are at risk big time, because what's in the liner on those paper cups it gets straight into the body.
Wow.
Major hormone disruption.
I didn't even
And
think
then
about that.
sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed, but at your neighborhood coffee shop, they might pour the hot beverage into a plastic cup before they add the ice, because they're trying to mix it up before the ice melts, and they'll put the
Mm-hmm.
ice in later.
Right.
And so if you put hot liquid on a plastic to go cup, that's also putting microplastics in your body. And they found microplastics in the brain.
Yeah, right. Go figure. A lot of these things bypass the blood-brain barrier, and people aren't even aware of the neurotoxins, and that's a
Yeah.
whole other issue.
Yeah.
Sandy, curious, because have you found in your travels and your research and just being exposed to all these beautiful people in the biohacking space and health space, have you found any detoxes, or is there any practices that you like to do, just knowing at the end of the day, we're all exposed to this. It doesn't matter what you do.
Yes. So I love lymphatic drainage. You can get an MLD massage, manual lymphatic drainage massage. It's like being pet. It's weird. They just rub your skin, because the lymph system is just under the top layer of skin. So all of your body just barely touching. It's really great for people who've gone through chemo to help reduce the bloating that's caused from all of these toxins in the body, helps
Yeah.
to move them out. And so I did a lot of that when I was sick. Rebounding helps with that. And then sound vibration. I mean, the vibration chair that I made, I can feel it moving my lymph. And
Wow.
if people mistake it for a hunger, like a stomach growl, but if in the center of your abdomen, kind of like right below the rib cage, you get a little bloop, 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 bloop. It's not your stomach. It's not off to the left. It's right there in the center. If you feel that, that's your lymph draining. So sometimes just deep diaphragmatic
Wow.
breathing will push and move things through your lymph. And so anything that can aid with that is perfect. And on top of that, I think sauna is probably the best detox we have.
Yeah, I agree. I think sauna. I bought a lot of biohacking gear before sauna was one of the last things I bought, which was really silly. I have a Therasage, And for, you know, like $700, it is probably the most pound for pound, the best biohack. You get heat shock proteins, you get a detox effect, you get red light therapy. I mean, you really can't, you get a
Yeah.
cardiovascular, you actually get a VO2 max workout, you know, if you're doing it right. So yeah, I agree.
And if you are detoxing, it's better to have one like that, like what Therasage makes, because your head is out of it and you're not breathing in what you're sweating out.
Mm.
Because we can sweat it out in one of those fancy, beautiful saunas and then immediately breathe it back in.
Oh yeah, that's fun. Good fun stuff right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I want to wrap things up, but I want to talk about your event that's coming up, the Biohacker Expo. And can you, yeah, share a little bit about that event, when it's going to be at, where it's at, if people want to get tickets?
Yeah, so it's in Miami at the Miami Airport Convention Center, and it's February 28th and March 1st. And we're doing a couple of things differently than you'll get at other events like ours. The first is that we have comedian JP Sears hosting the main stage. And I think, laughter's the best medicine. If we can laugh at ourselves and have a good time, we're going to heal faster under any circumstance. And so I think he's perfect for setting the tone for the way I approach my own health. I would much rather laugh at myself than be too serious. And then the other neat thing that we just announced is that dogs are welcome. We're going to have a dog play zone because my dog was the really transformative thing. When one of my doctors told me not to exercise, I got a dog. And I was like,
Mm.
I'm not, because my heart rate was going up after exercise. And I was like, well, I'm not going to not exercise. I'm just going to go slower, be more intentional about it. And so my dog's been a really important part of my journey.
Amazing.
And then I think that, for events like this, we have a lot more experiences that are free that are included in the price of a ticket. So Roxiva will have these psychedelic light experiences, and we have silent disco headphones for guided meditations and breath work and consciousness talks all throughout the day, where it's really experiential and not just sitting in a chair and watching a speaker and we have that too. And
Yeah.
the main stage talks are amazing, but it's not just about that. It's about really trying things out. And I'm pretty sure we haven't lined it all up yet, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have some neat biohacks for the pets in the pet play zone too, the dog play
Oh,
zone.
cool.
So bring your dog, bring yourself. It's going to be a good time.
Yeah. Very cool. JP is going to be great too. I got a chance to meet him just passing by at a Whole Foods in San Francisco a long time ago, and he was quite hilarious. People don't realize too, he's got a really deep background in health. He's a Czech practitioner, and a lot of people don't know that about him, but he's
I didn't
very
know.
well versed in health, and a lot of people just think he's the funny guy, which he is also that, but he also knows a ton about health. I wanted to ask you one last question: is what what are some biohacks that you're excited about, or what are some of the vendors, or who's going to be there that you're excited about testing out some of their gear, or just some of the things you're expecting?
Well, truly, the one that I have not experienced before that I'm most excited about is amp coil, which you mentioned.
Yeah.
So I haven't had the chance to try that yet. I, I you know, I love I love all things frequencies. So
Yeah.
anyone who's doing that sort of thing at the event, there's so many different types of red light vendors. You've got a red light lounger, you've got portable red light. Um, the one thing I don't want to do at the event is get in a sauna. I don't need to get hot while
Yeah.
I'm running
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah.
But like this year, Liquivita is going to do drips behind the main stage. I think that that's really cool. So you can
Yeah.
get an IV drip and get a boost while you're watching the main stage talks.
That's
And then
very
we've
cool.
got Pure Wave with their vibroacoustic beds. That's
Yeah.
always fun. I love that stuff. Um, honestly, I'm so busy running it, I don't get a chance to try much, but I do want to try that amp coil this time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Freddie Kim will let you try it, I'm sure.
Okay,
Freddie, I'm
great.
sure, will be there. Well, awesome. Sandy Martin, any last words before I let you go?
I think that the message I really want to leave with people is that if you feel like it's something beyond anything your doctor can see, you're probably right. Like, trust your gut. There's 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 information out there, there's ways to find it, and it's okay to say no to a doctor. That's probably was my first act as a biohacker, was to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And it's not always about what you do, it's most often about what you stop doing that really helps the most. And so, give up something, give it a shot, see if you feel better.
Yeah, amazing. That reminds me of that Bruce Lee quote. He talks about like subtracting. We're always trying to add
Mm.
something, but sometimes we need to subtract to actually move forward and go forward. So I think to your
Yeah.
point, yeah, powerful stuff. Sandy Martin, founder of Biohacker Expo. Looking forward to that in February. If you're in the Miami or not, it's a good excuse to travel to Florida. You can head out there. And yeah, Sandy, thanks for being on the show. I can't wait to have you back on again in the future.
Thanks. Thanks, Joel. Appreciate it.
Bye.